Hey everyone, welcome to the Sig-Auth call. Today is April 23rd, 2025. Uh, we have two announcements. The first one is the hierarchical namespaces repo has been archived. So this was discussed in the previous Sig-Auth meetings, and due to lack of maintainers and adopters, the repo has been archived. And then the other repo is the PSP migrator. That one has been archived as well because PSP to PSA migrations are no longer relevant, and the repo hasn't been updated in a while. And then in terms of agenda, I think the big one that we have is to do the 134 planning. So maybe we can start with that first and then get to Mo's uh, item. Let me make it bigger. Okay. So a bunch of us spent some time during the last two triage calls, the Sig-Auth triage calls, to create a section for 134 and then see what we want to do in this release. So maybe we can go over the list and see if this is the plan and then like what are the next steps for those. And then also for 134, we mentioned that the KEPs should be reviewable by May 15th. Like this was tentative based on like previous releases in the last year. So that like we have enough time to like review the KEPs, address comments, and then get them merged. So in the implementable one, the first one is structured auth config. The plan was to promote this to GA in 134. It's been beta for 3 releases now. It reached beta in 130. There are two major items that we want to finish up. One is like egress network selection, and then other one is distributed claim support using Cell. So we're planning to do that in this release, but there was one other question that we had is can we promote it to GA in a release where we are also making changes?
So the overall structure of the file, like we're happy with. These things are like net new additions. So even after this is GA, like we will continue being able to add, you know, put additive things into this. So I think if the structure of the file isn't changing and we don't, the things we're wanting to do are like evolutions, additions, um, that we would also be fine with doing, in the future after GA, then I don't see it as a blocker for GA.
Would you expect those new things to have independent gates so that if something went wrong with them, they could be turned off without someone having to turn off the entire structured authent feature? I don't know what these things.
Yeah, I would expect them to do what we do with other config things. Like if they are a lower stability level, then they should have a gate associated with it, so you're using a lower stability thing. And if you omit it from the config, I think you get the behavior you get today. So it's like an opt-in thing on the admin side. So in the past, we've said if we're adding new alpha level things into like a beta or GA config, we make you turn on a gate so you know that you're like making use of a less stable thing.
That makes a bunch of sense to me. I just want to make sure that we agree and that it's clear.
Okay.
Yeah.
So quick question. So in the cap, I think these things are included as part of this feature set.
Are they?
I mean,
Yeah.
um, I'm fine. I'm fine either way, just adding gates just to be careful. So I don't think that's a problem. Um, um, I
I
just
would
wasn't sure exactly. Oh,
I
sorry.
would be unhappy if we had new functionality that for the very first time was put into production and not disableable. I think that would be a mistake for us to do. So separating out options that you think should come in as separate features, okay. But I think if we add features yeah, you have to have it disableable for release.
I mean, both of these are opt-in things. If you don't change the config, you're not gonna get the behavior. So it's already opt-in, but doubly protected so that you know you're making use of a newer thing. Makes sense to me. I don't have strong feelings about like we've put stuff under a single umbrella cap before just to minimize paperwork, and then said like, you know, the file format is here. We have multiple gates that are part of this, and we'll progress them independently. I don't really care as long as we're doing it in an orderly way, and like the less stable functionality is separable and protected. So it's kind of up to you whether you do it under a single cap and like graduate the format and then have the gate around this new aspect, or if you do it as a follow-up cap. I don't really care.
Okay. So I think what we're saying is we would be okay if we basically graduate the existing functionality as is, and any new changes as part of the same cap, we would just document the new feature gates as, I guess, beta-ish, I guess, whatever makes sense. And so I think it'd probably be at least 2 new feature gates, one for the egress selector and one for the distributed claim support.
A default on feature gate protecting an opt-in admin config field is a little bit silly because the main benefit of the feature gate there is to make the admin ack that they're using less stable functionality. So if they don't have to ack it because the gate defaults on, there's not much point. We can talk about the specifics of it. Like if it truly is opt-in in the file, if they don't touch the file and opt in, then they don't get the behavior. That might be enough. We can talk about the specifics when we.
There's an implementation behind this as well.
Mm-hmm.
Say that again, David?
There's an implementation behind it as well. It's not just the fields, right? So,
Right.
would I expect gating off of an egress network selection? Well, it depends on whether it's going to have a null pointer exception, right? I don't know.
I'm fine putting a gate. The gate has to be there and the field has to be there in the config. That's fine.
Okay.
I think it would be one of those weird gates that's beta but off by default just to be annoying. But okay.
All right.
Cool.
Next one is cluster trust bundle. It moved to beta in 133. So should we keep it in beta in 134 as well and see if we can get feedback? Next one is authorize with field and label selectors. We had promote to GA in 134. Does that sound right?
I'm happy with promoting it.
Yep.
Was there any work left on this, y'all, other than the mechanical act of bumping it?
No.
Nothing
It's
on
the subject access review side and the cell side, and we kind of got it in the shape we wanted it from the start.
Okay.
The next one is ensure image pulls kept. So this is the one that Standard's been working on with Sig-Auth folks. The plan is to promote it to beta in 134. Like one of the major things there is to make this work with the other kip that I have, which is service account for image pulls.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also an issue for all the follow-ups. So we'll work on updating the kip.
Yeah. So I think the benchmarking and in-memory caching layer are pretty well defined, just need to be done so that it performs the way we need. The rationalization and integration with the service account token stuff, you need to think through what the behavior is there.
Yeah. So next one is allow anonymous auth for configured endpoints. This one uses the structured auth and config file. So that's why we had this question on should the config file move to GA first and then this moves to GA, or can it all happen in the same timeline?
If we're promoting the containing file version to v1, it seems reasonable to let this go as well to GA. Again, the surface area is very small. We're already using it. So we have real world feedback, and it's just not a complicated feature in terms of there being a lot of questions about whether we want to make changes.
So are we okay with moving this to GA in 134 then?
Mm-hmm. What release are we working on? I know, it's so hard to keep track.
Okay. So this is the other kit that I mentioned, the one I'm working on for projected service account tokens. So the plan is to move it to beta in 134. The big one is to make sure this works well with ensure image pulls. And then we had a couple of follow-up items, which was caching for the service account tokens that are generated. And then also some type of indication from a credential plugin to say if caching needs to be done at the service account level or another dimension of like the pod level. So we have follow-up items for those. The plan is to address all of those, make it work with ensure image pulls, and then graduate this to beta in 134. Okay. Next one is external signing for SA tokens. Do we want to promote it to beta in 134?
I would like to. Landed alpha in 132, stayed in alpha 133. We've integrated with it and tested it both functionally and at scale. It's an opt-in configuration in prod. I didn't know if anyone else, Micah or Mo, had done testing or actual integration with it yet.
We have not, and I suspect we won't get to it before upstream timelines. But I did. I'd asked you, Micah, that like, could y'all at least try it in EKS and make sure you could reasonably migrate to it, because it would be really unfortunate for us to promote this.
Yeah, we'll definitely try it. I'll work on definitely before it gets to GA.
Well, I mean, even if you, it would be helpful to know before we do the beta promotion that there's like a sanity check proof of concept integration on your side, so there's not a glaring gap. So in the next 3 to 4 weeks, if it'd be possible to like even just wireframe it out, like yes, sure. I see how all the data
not actually roll it, but just check that like it checks all the boxes that the functionality we need. Yeah, I can follow up to make sure that happens.
Okay.
I think probably from the GK side, we need to do something similar for the previous one, the service account tokens for image pulls. I'll just see if I can find somebody to proof of concept our integration for that.
Yeah, okay. We are actively working on the AKS side of this. At least we'll get that side. But yeah, it'd be really nice if someone else also.
Can you tag yourself in that to here to figure out who owns the POC? Thank you. So actually, I'm reasonably happy promoting this as is. There was a question about a reference implementation for a signer, and then an open question in the CAP about extracting the legacy token controller. And I'm actually not sure about either, like how useful either of those things are to do in 134. Like if we do them, will they get used or not?
On the second one, the legacy one, didn't we all mostly agree that it was okay not doing it because in the environments where we were interested in using the external signer, we wanted to turn that controller off, basically?
That would be my first recommendation to people who wanted to use an external signer. And if someone didn't want to do that, then I'm skeptical that an extracted version of the controller is going to like meet their needs. I think they're probably going to have to do something custom, and I'm not sure about extracting the current one as a base for them. My first recommendation would be turn off that controller and say if you want better security, don't use non-expiring legacy tokens.
Yeah,
I'd be happy with that recommendation.
I want an HSM for my creds, but I want them to be around forever.
Right, I know, right.
yeah. And so now my
I
HSM
mean,
can't.
you joke, but that's what our customers want.
It-
They're complaining
And
about
if
legacy.
that's, I don't think the Kubernetes open source controller like saying don't run it, but if you want to run it, here's how you can pull it in and run it. Like that's a weird thing to say. So I'm happy just saying use external signer, probably shouldn't run this controller. If you want to provide legacy tokens via some other way, like okay, go ahead. But our recommendation is if you're using external signer, don't run the legacy controller.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Okay, so we'll move that to beta. Did we resolve this one, the reference implementation? I don't think we resolved that yet.
I struggle to like if we write a reference implementation, who's going to use it? I don't want to spend time doing work that none of us are actually going to use.
Would we need some, at least maybe not reference implementation, but dummy implementation for EE testing or something?
I mean, we're exercising it in integration tests in like a legitimate way. Like we're starting a real API server and pointing it at a real gRPC endpoint that really implements this API. That seems sufficient.
That's what I'm wondering. Yeah,
In our tests that allow beta APIs or beta features, could we have it on there? So we would need some kind of implementation, right, for it to do that, right? You can't
maybe
just...
not a production implementation, but just like we said, a reference implementation. To say here's how you would go about doing this. Like if you want to plug it into your TPM or whatever, like you're gonna have to do other work. But this just shows I can also read a file from disk, but do it over a gRPC.
Yeah.
That doesn't feel that different than like the Go file inside the integration test.
It already has an integration test today that's exercising the gRPC.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we wouldn't have let it merge without an integration test. I mean,
yeah,
I wouldn't
isn't that the
work at all,
reference
but
implementation?
And that I'm comfortable saying that that's the reference implementation.
Yeah, I really like integration tests because you don't have to spin up like a dedicated job in test infra with a dedicated cluster and then go make images containing signer implementations that no one's really using as is. I mean, the KMS one was such a pain to go make, and it's still painful. Like every time we bump the Go version, we have to like fix the Docker file and bump the Go version and build new things. And like
we fixed all that, so now it's all magic and just somehow updates.
I think the example implementation that we have running in the integration test is probably fine.
Would we need a new test though? Could we not use an existing test that has beta stuff turned on to make? Don't we have a test with the beta stuff turned on to make sure it doesn't blow up? So couldn't we just do that in there? Just to actually exercise it, really? I'm just nervous about not actually doing it for reals. Like I know integration tests are a close approximation of reals. Yeah.
I don't like tons of flavors of cluster configurations in EDEs. They're a pain.
Yeah, no, so I agree with that. I was more saying is I thought we had one where we turned on some beta stuff, right? So why don't we just...
It's not enough to just turn on the beta thing. You have to like reconfigure the API servers in that beta job to install the signer and point the API server at it.
I mean, I was hoping it would be a kind one where it would be easy to do that.
We can move on and leave this as an open question. I will keep pushing to use the integration version, which keeps us contained. But
Okay. Next one is pod surge, alpha in 134.
This year.
Fingers crossed.
We're gonna do it to here. We're gonna make it.
Alright.
Okay. The next one is fine-grained kubelet API authorization, beta in 133. So it'll probably stay beta in 134 as well.
It's fine.
Okay. The next one is handling undecryptable resources, with alpha in 133. Oh yeah, okay. This one, I think we wanted to ask David for the status on this in 134.
So it's been alpha for 2 releases. I don't know that we're going to get a lot of experience reports about this. This is like, how many times did you have to break glass because your KMS like went sideways?
I mean, in those situations, the way it gone sideways was catastrophic to the cluster, where it was everything was hosed, not like 2 items.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we see this, it's because the customer deleted their key and then they want us to like go back in time and undelete it.
Yeah.
Which we can't do. So
Oh, yeah, and this is why we mandate soft deletes only.
I think the only case that we've seen something where this would be helpful is like when there's like a bit flip.
Yeah.
I've
Do-
seen it for rotation as well. It's not all hosed. It is like, oh, we forgot to do this one.
You're only mostly dead.
Yeah.
But David, the question, I think you missed it earlier, was so how far along are we on this? Is it ready for beta?
How will we know when we're good to graduate if the use and feedback is so sporadic? We just thought real hard for another 8 months and didn't think of any other problems.
Maybe.
Okay. I mean, maybe. It's alpha, so it's not actually on or usable by default yet.
That's fair.
What's the plan?
All right. I will see whether we can dig up someone to actually sweep and ensure we have all the testing, and if we can't, then I guess we will kill it, because that will really say how important it is. So, all right.
I'm gonna be really sad if you kill it, David. That was a lot of effort.
I will be really sad too.
Or if we
I'm
don't have
hard
the
pressed to say like something can stay alpha forever, right? Like,
yeah. If we don't have the testing, another possibility is to add the testing, so we can.
yes, I agree.
Okay.
Okay. The next one is DRA admin access, Skip. I think it landed alpha in 133, so the plan is to promote it to beta in 134.
That was just a label on the admission thing, right?
In the rest storage.
Right. Right. The label of the rest storage. Sorry.
Listen, it's important. I know we fought on this for like the better part of a month.
My memory didn't even consider that I had lost that argument.
That's hilarious.
So promotion would be like basically a bit flip on the gate. So size would be small if we're happy with the shape.
I'm blanking. Did we, Rita or Nero, did we add metrics and stuff? Did we do all the stuff that
No,
we?
I think this one would need more metrics probably. I need to look at the cap again, but yeah,
Okay.
I think there's some minor amount of work. And
should be small to medium. Yeah.
Okay. Let's describe what we need to do so we don't. The surface area is small. I don't think we're going to get much feedback other than I set the label and did what I needed to do. Like promoting the beta once we have the metrics and whatever else we said we would do in place sounds fine.
Okay. So those were the ones that were implementable, and then these are ones that has a cap. And question is, do we want to plan it for 134?
So the implementable ones, the ones that had like actual sort of design questions, were the image pool ones, right? The service account side and the
Insurance.
insurer credential side.
Mhm.
I think pretty much everything else was like a little bit of cleanup, follow up, but mostly just a straight promotion.
I mean, structured auth then, like the egress selector is
Oh,
probably
yeah. Sorry, the pods.
the distributed claims for sell. That's not going to be fun. I've already looked at it enough to say
That's
that
fair.
would be zero fun.
Hopefully, people are keeping track of like which things their names are on and how much bandwidth they have.
Yeah. So I know Standa is going to drive ensure image pulls. I think to here we're relying on you for pod certs. I'll do structured auth then. Anish will do workload identity for image pulls.
Okay. Next is, so these have a cap, and we want to plan it for 134. So PSA changes for host fields and probes. I think there was a PR for it. They just didn't get it merged for 133, and the comment there says they plan to do it for 134.
Jordan, did you look at this in 133? Did I see you were marked as a reviewer?
I don't remember looking at this.
Yeah. I think that might be part of the problem is I feel like no one.
Like the pod security admission mechanics are pretty straightforward. I think it was more a question of what should it be enforcing, and Tim weighed in. He did a really like exhaustive sweep probably 5 years ago of like all the fields and pods and all the things, all the problems they can cause. So he was looking at some of the details of what they wanted to protect. Um, it would be great if someone who has more of the implications of those host fields and like what is actually happening on the node with those fields could like help review the design. Like the PSA mechanics, I'm happy to review because they're pretty straightforward and mechanical. But like what is actually happening on the node with those probes and what the host fields can be abused to do, I don't know a lot of that. So Tim or someone on the node side would be helpful to review that aspect.
So maybe we need an action item to reach out to Tim to see if there's him or if he knows anyone else that could help provide that.
Yeah. So it's like a weird intersection of network and node because the kubelet's doing the stuff, but then some things happen inside the container runtime, and sometimes you're protected by a container network namespace, and sometimes you're not. And I would have to figure that stuff out. And so there's people who are better versed in it. That's Tim Allclair, not Tim Hawken.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. This next one is hardened kubelet serving cert validation. Promote to alpha in 134.
I have a PR for this. the and implementation PR that we can sort of chat about.
So there's also a KEP PR.
Yeah, because I don't think we merged the KEP yet, so we need to.
No, we sort of got hung up in asking if what the KEP was proposing was feasible, like getting at least a sketch of an implementation proof of concept or something. And so that's where we got stalled out and what Mo's proof of concept is hoping to help with.
Yep. So we can maybe come back to it, but I do have questions on it, but they're very specific to the implementation. So I don't know. I guess for the purpose of planning the release, I think we said we wanted to try to get this in because it is a known gap that at least the fix is relatively easy to express in terms of human words, if not necessarily obvious to implement.
Yeah, I'd like to see it in 134 in alpha. Guillermo confirmed he can help out with this. Yeah, Mo, is your PR or your proof of concept on one of this?
It's in the agenda.
Okay.
It's right after the.
Okay. Oh, I see it. Okay, perfect.
Okay. So those are that. And then the last section is needs kept, planned or not planned for 134. This one is what we talked about in the last Sig-Auth call, default authentication to admission or other webhooks. So I think we talked about having a KEP for 134, no implementation.
Yeah, well, I think we specifically talked about during the 134 timeframe if we could get a KEP. So not necessarily before enhancements freeze, but during the timeframe. But yeah, we need an owner because I think a lot of it is just enumerating the entire space and deciding which of the possibilities we want to pursue. So I think this is a non-trivial ask. So if someone's interested, I think it is a decent amount of work to just do that.
The node restrictions for essays.
Yeah, I mean, I did the POC for impersonation or an impersonation-based flow for this, but I don't know if we wanted to pursue this in 134.
I spoke to Gian last week. I'm trying to encourage him to write a KEP. I am not sure yet without seeing the KEP whether I think it is plannable for 134 or whether it would be KEP in 134 and we do in 135. But the guy who had the item on the agenda just before you, Gian, I don't know how to spell his last name. He's going to listen to this recording and know that I don't know how to spell his name.
David is apologizing in advance. If you
yes. Sorry, Gian, when you watch this recording, I don't know how to spell your last name, but I have volunteered you to write the KEP. So, and it was going to be based on your POC, Mo. I thought that was a better solution.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay. So, but so you're targeting at least a KEP during the 134 timeline, even if we
Yes.
don't work on it yet?
Yes. I know that the POC was essentially complete, but that doesn't mean that I want to just ram it through. So.
No, I just it's okay if we said we didn't have the cycles for this. I just wanted to.
Next one is conditional authorization via admission.
So no, Lucas said he was interested.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, I don't know if Lucas is on the call. No.
He's not. It's like pretty late for him.
Yeah. But I think this one and the next one, right? These are the ones that we said that we would want as prereqs for RBAC++.
Yes.
So I think Lucas is interested. I don't know if we have. I guess, David, do you think the second one, which is I think primarily API machinery, you think we could maybe do that in 134?
Right now, API Machinery's effort is devoted towards declarative field validation, and that is me and Joe and Tim, and a couple of the others.
Which Tim are we talking about?
Hawken. Just you can tell based on the volume of stuff coming in, it's Tim Hawken. So there is still some core design things there. That's the busiest thing for API Machinery. I think it would depend on how big it actually ended up being. And that's going to require someone to actually look and write it up, which is like half the work. If Lucas is interested in doing that, I would commit to reviewing the design. And then from there, I'd probably know whether I could commit to review the feature.
Okay.
And that would stand for both of them. I think the design, is actually, they're both pretty powerful. I think being able to have conditional authorization is going to be harder to design.
Yeah,
because
that's why I feel like the second one, design and implementation, I think will probably be much smaller than the first one.
yeah, I agree.
So if we're gonna pick one, I would pick the smaller one to start with.
Oh, you would. I think the design would be a lot more interesting and actually more useful for a new authorizer to have the ability to coordinate authorization and admission.
No, I know, but small victories.
Okay.
I'm mentally planning this work for 135, not 34.
Okay.
All right, so maybe action item is you can ping Lucas and see if he's interested in doing the design work in 134.
I think that's fine.
Yeah. RBAC plus plus, no, not in 134.
Right.
Serving certs for cube services. I think we need port certs for this.
Certs.
Yeah. Same port certs for this, HSM support. Nothing with reference grant, right? We're not doing anything.
I mean, you could argue that the two prereqs that we talked about for RBAC plus plus could be useful there too, because reference grant is about authorization. So it might be useful, but
And this one is just an open issue. Yeah, I don't think any of these we're prioritizing. Okay, so that's all the caps, and I think we know who is working on which ones in 134. Okay, let me go back to the agenda.
I mean, before we move on to like my other thing, is there anything that we didn't discuss that's on anyone's mind for 134? Any designs or implementations or anything that's just gotten lost? I think I tried to do a sweep of stuff to try to make sure it was represented in the doc, but just in case.
Think we're good. Okay, so the next item is Mo.
Okay. So as we have the KEP open, right, we want to do CN level validation on TLS serving certificates for kubelets when API server is acting as the client. In the KEP, we defined, I think, a variety of issues that can happen. The obvious one was IP reuse on nodes. So I think the check is relatively easy to conceptualize. It's kind of hard to implement because TLS semantics in relation to request response semantics aren't always easy to formulate in code. So I have sort of two approaches for this. The first one basically abused the HTTP tracing logic to get access to the underlying TLS connection of a particular request to then check the state of that TLS connection. And if that state's not what we want, it basically cancels the request. Guillermo, I see you're on the call. You did point out that it is theoretically possible for us to then still make the request to the kubelet, and if that request had any private data, we would leak that. Um, uh, it was not clear to me how bad of a concern that was, but it didn't seem right. And so the second approach I took was what I called like a pre-flight probe, which makes the assumption that the transport will more than likely reuse TLS connections for a given host and/or that even if you make multiple TLS collections for the same host, you're likely to have the same TLS semantics, right? Like likely the same certificates being used. And so basically it tries to make a pre-request that doesn't have any parameters and stuff right? Or any path or anything, right? It's just trying to make a request, like a head request, basically, to the kubelet in question to check its TLS details.
Is that
Uh,
vulnerable to time of check, time of use though, or are you reusing the connection?
it is certainly vulnerable because we are not making any specific assumptions there or any guarantees that it won't use a different connection. But in all practical senses, if you're making like since the delta between those requests is almost zero, like I don't know if realistically you could get to a different host. Not
Every time that we've had a time of check, time of use bug, it's always been like, oh, who would ever do that?
Yeah.
And then
Bad-
someone
bad
does
guy.
something really,
Yeah.
yeah.
But
Like who would set a DNS TTL to 0?
but
Insert
so
different responses.
the other aspect though that I didn't know about this until I played with it is when you get a response back from the round tripper, the response actually has a TLS connection state field on it. So if you're willing to make a request, you can check its response value, right? And look at it. So no matter what, we can always guarantee that the API server will not forward the response data to a client. The hard part is guaranteeing that it won't make the request at all to the kubelet. That's the hard part.
David had his hand up. Were you,
So is
question.
all of this trying to avoid creating a new connection to the kubelet each time? And if we did that, we would just use the TLS, was it client hello or whatever the negotiation flow points are?
Yeah, so there is no way regardless of which connection hook we use, yes, you are right, David. We don't want to make unbounded TLS connections. If we were okay making a new TLS connection per request, then obviously it would be a one-to-one mapping, and then it would be super trivial.
Well, it's still tricky to get the plumbing to the to get the plumbing to the point. The TLS hello hook isn't as nice to use as I thought or hoped it was, but it's better than trying to do a shared connection validation.
So to be fair, at least the POCs I have don't require touching client Go, which is my favorite part about them.
Well, this is all handled QAPI server side, right?
Well, I mean, yes,
Client
but
Go
it
for that?
uses regular client Go stuff too.
Yeah. If we categorized whether we reused the connection based on whether it had done this check.
We can't do that because we don't know what check to make until you are making a request. It is detached from the connection itself.
I might be missing that. It's a connection to a specific kubelet, right? And we know that kubelet's name all the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But if I'm trying to remember. Jordan, you pointed it out to me. I'm blanking on how to describe it. It's the pre-existing TLS connection to a kubelet that we were happy with at the time, but then someone's trying to impersonate it, right? That's the case. I'm trying to remember.
Right. You have Node A.
Yeah.
Client dials through QAPI server to go to Node A legitimately. You establish a connection to Node A, and you validated the CN for that when you established it. Then Node B lies about its IP and points its IP to Node A's IP, and then tries to connect through the QAPI server to Node B, resolves to the same IP address, and the underlying connection cache is like, oh, I've got a dial open to that IP. Cool.
Yeah.
That's
Yes, that's what we were trying to avoid. And the only way to avoid that is you need to have some way at the round trip level to assert that the connection that round trip is going to use makes sense.
Okay. And because, well, So in client Go, we actually index the connections based on whatever we want. Could we not index it based on the node name as well?
Maybe like once you start messing with client Go stuff, like stuff down in the transport round trip or connection cache, yeah, you can do whatever you want. It also gets way harder to reason about because you're touching stuff down in client Go, rest, and transport, and you want to make super sure you don't break like the other 98% of the universe that doesn't care about this.
I agree, but
No.
you're comparing against using HTTP trace?
No,
Oh, okay.
I'm not a fan of HTTP trace. It's clever. It scares me to death.
Yeah, I will say I think I prefer the probing approach the most, even though it's the most computationally expensive.
Can you walk me through the attack path a little more here? Because it seems like we're going pretty far off the rails of how TLS is supposed to be used if we're like.
So I think the problem is that TLS is unaware of the semantic of the connection that you're trying to make, right? You can talk, like when API server is connecting to some arbitrary server, from TLS perspective, that can be a totally valid connection. But from the semantic of that API request, it doesn't make sense, right? Because API server is like, oh, I'm trying to talk to kubelet foo, but I happen to have just like connected to some random server, and the TLS connection is fine, but like it doesn't make sense because I'm not talking to foo right now. That's
Actually,
Well,
uh,
kubelet foo. I mean, you had to connect to something that with assert that asserted kubelet foo's identity, right?
just IP though, IP or host name though, right? But not the actual identity of the kubelet.
Let's put the actual identity in the cert and validate
It,
that.
it is in the cert. It's in the CN. That's what we're trying to validate.
okay, Go must cache connections based on the dial address because otherwise, if you dialed example.com and foo.com and they both resolved the same IP and were like virtual hosted and served with different certs, you would get one TLS connection to example.com cached and another connection to foo.com cached. That must be how it works.
So,
And
Anish, if you open the second PR, you can. I had to copy it.
move the lookup of the kubelet name to the address, the underlying like IP inside our dialer. We already have a custom dialer. So if we tell the Go layer, just dial the node name, then we will get the partitioning we want for keep alive connections based on the node name. And our dialer can then dial the IP or whatever and validate the CN at dial time. And then we'll have a set of cached connections to node A and a set of cached connections to node B. And if those get reused for node A and node B, that's fine.
Yeah. So if you scroll up, Anish, it's actually quite complex. How all the way, the first file. Okay. This entire file is copied out from transport stuff, and all it's doing is basically figuring out the cache key. It is not as obvious as one would hope.
Yeah, like I think right now we are resolving the node name to an IP address or a DNS name, and then handing that to the Go HTTP stack and saying, please dial this. And I'm asking, can we move that resolution inside our dialer? So we will just tell the Go stack, like, dial this, make a request to the node name. And then our dialer will resolve the node name to an IP and validate this CN when it does the dial and hand back a connection that is legitimate to cache for that node name.
Is it a TCP connection or a TLS connection?
TLS connection.
Okay.
We need to dig into it, but I think we're doing something at one layer and then trying to compensate for Go not understanding the semantic difference of the identity of the
Wait,
server.
when you make the TLS connection though, right? Again, it's not when you're doing round trips, right?
Right.
So you don't know which kubelet you care about yet.
The round trip we make connects to a URL. The URL has a host field, which today has the resolved IP address of the node.
Mhm.
And I'm saying that masks from the Go HTTP stack information about what server it's connecting to, and it means it can reuse a connection that was established to a different kubelet. I'm suggesting that we form the URL that the API server talks to the kubelet as using like the actual node name, and then our dialer knows how to resolve the node name to the address for the node, so that at dial time it will do the TLS validation using standard TLS stuff and this additive CN check if we want. It's hard to talk about.
I see what you mean. I see what you mean now.
POC
Okay.
that out.
So,
That might work, and that way the connection gets cached based on the node name instead of based on the IP.
Exactly.
So you don't
you'll
have to
never get
rerun the validation once you have established the TLS connection.
yeah, okay. I see what you mean. I see. Yeah, so we will have to. It's like, yeah, we'll have to basically do the DNS part in a funny way to make it so that it ends up happening, right? Okay, but I think I follow what you're saying, Jordan. I think that seems okay.
We should POC it out and see if it like works in a more standard way with like working with the standard library connection pooling, so that it only pools and reuses connections to the same node
Yeah.
we tend to talk to.
Yeah, that makes sense. What was I thinking? Oh, I remember now. Can we make this all behave nicely with the egress selector stuff? Because that's at dial time.
I mean, we have to.
I mean, yes, I was just trying to figure out how.
I don't have that in my head well enough to remember.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. We can, yeah, we have to make it work with the egress selector stuff. Otherwise, no one can use this in the way that they expect to use it.
Right.
Oh. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so that's another POC to go try. That's fine. Woohoo.
All right. We have 2 minutes, but I think that's all for the agenda items. Anything else before we all drop off? Oh. Okay. Thank you, everyone. See you all in 2 weeks.
Thanks.